Hello, this is Cho of the Shiny Killers Discord, and welcome to another episode of the Shiny Review. Today we have 3 cards that we need to talk about. A new Produce SSR for Amana, Support SSR for Kogane, and Support SR for May. Remember that Amana and Kogane are both limited time cards, so they may not return for a while. If you're a fan of Amana or Kogane, it's best to pull now. Starting things off, we have Amana, who kicks off our 6th series of SSRs. The best way to explain Amana is that she's a bit of a gamble. Her most impactful passive requires her to be a center, but she's not quite as immediately strong as many of the other limited centers that currently excel. That being said, if said gambit does work out, there's the potential of Amana being powerful, but in a much more situational way. Outside of being a center, Amana carries a lot of benefits through memory gauge boosting, damage cuts, and backing it up with reasonable buffs through link appeals and credible damage to boot. Though I am a little hesitant to recommend pulling for Amana if you aren't ready to take a few gambles of your own on the next few Alstroemeria cards, or if you lack Chiyuki 3. She could either pay off big time or burn you badly. Her roles are center, tank, memory gauge booster, and buffer, and I moderately to highly recommend pulling for Amana. Amana's initial skill is a vocal 3.5 appeal that buffs your memory gauge by 15% and also reduces incoming damage by 10% for 2 turns, and links into a vocal 80% buff for 4 turns. At max, she gains access to a vocal 5.0 appeal that increases your memory gauge by 25%, reduces incoming damage by 20% for 2 turns, and links into a vocal 80% buff for 4 turns. Her 1-star passive is a vocal 50% up that requires Amana on your team, and it has a 50% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive is a memory gauge boost of 50% that requires you to be in the center position. This has a 60% chance to activate once, and it also unlocks an additional plus 50 vocal uncap. At 3 stars, she gains 2 separate uncaps, one being a vocal plus 150 and the other being a vocal 50. And her 4-star passive is a vocal 75% up that requires you to have an active mental damage cut buff and has a 30% chance to activate 3 times. Her memory appeal, once maxed out, is a vocal 150% buff for 3 turns, and links into a maximum vocal 2.5 appeal that it hits all judges, and scales based on how high your mental is. For the support recommendations, this is going to feel very similar to the Alstroemeria setup we had for Tank of 5, so vocal, SP, and a little bit of mental. Nothing has particularly changed with Alstroemeria's vocal support setup since the last time we talked about it, so take what worked then and substitute out the Amana support for whatever works best for you. Other vocal supports that can provide damage are pretty ideal. Sakuya is here mostly for her additional SP gain, as her passive works heavily against what this iteration of Alstroemeria wants to do. Meguru and Toru are very solid permanent options. For the team recommendations, much like the Tank of 5 team recommendation, we have a similarly drafted team featuring the latest Amana. As her passives dictate her to be the center, not a whole lot necessarily changes in the lineup order, so pick your poison of supports and go aggressive as you can. Some popular supports include Madoka 2 and Toru 2, Kaho 5 and Choco 5, Asahi 4, and Mei 3. On to the grades. Amana as a center earns anywhere from a B- to an S+. There's some real potential with this memory appeal if you get the ideal rotation to get 2 memory appeals within the first 5 turns. It has some great payoffs if everything plays out correctly, but it might also crash and burn if passives activate too early or too late. It's a real gamble, but it's worth trying out if you get Amana to at least 2 stars. I do think that she hovers around the B range without her 2-star passive, and otherwise jumps up to pretty reasonable levels as you get her further and further uncapped. As a unit, similar situation, B to S-. It's kinda weird to consider that a limited time card feels a little average compared to most, that seem pretty ridiculous overall. The main reason is that Amana ends up losing a passive as non-center, which could be a deal breaker right then and there. Her damage is pretty standard nowadays, the damage cut can be useful, and the memory gauge boosting outside of linking is still top notch, so feel free to experiment if you do end up finding Amana. Next up we have Kogane. Kogane has received yet another limited support, this time a visual unit with a fair amount of SP as well. One of the most interesting things about this Kogane right off the bat is she's the first support card to have a support skill level up at 45, which leads me to believe we'll see skills eventually leveling up at 35, 25, and so on. Kogane is a pretty complete package for visual teams, but be mindful of her first, maybe weak 1-star passive. Her support skills are Idol's Bond, Promise Recovery, and Rest Boost, and she has 3 unique support skills. Visual Mastery SP reaching plus 12 at level 70, Unit Mastery Visual reaching plus 8 at level 65, and Visual Mastery Stamina reaching plus 6 at level 80. Her support appeal does scale, starting at a Visual 3.0 at level 1, working its way to a Visual 3.5 by level 80. Her TFD idea is Talk, and her Insight token for Grad is Mental. Kogane's 1-star passive is a visual 40% up that requires the turn count to be 4 or later. This has a 20% chance to activate twice. Her 2-star passive is a visual 75% up that requires your mental to be 74% or lower. This has a 10% chance to activate 3 times. Her 3-star uncap is a plus 100 to visual, and her 4-star appeal is a visual 1.2 to 6.0 appeal that scales based on how low your mental is, and also applies a self-poison of 5% for 5 turns. Kogane earns an A. Kogane's new card is pretty weird. There's sort of some intended synergy with the recent Kiriko card thanks to Melancholy, but it doesn't really commit itself too heavily on the idea. Plus, it's not the matching attribute either, which can be of detriment, of course. The Melancholy buff itself also acts as more of a problem than anything else, as you could accidentally wipe what little mental you'd have left for your ideal damage scenario. The passives are a little weak compared to most other Antika supports, but the masteries are what make this card pretty powerful. I moderately to highly recommend pulling for Kogane. Lastly, we have Mei. Continuing the copy-paste efforts of Event SR, Mei is virtually identical to Chiyuki, even down to the dance attribute. She's a bit of a starter card for Collabo Fest with her small 5% dance buff to all allies, though I don't find that this card is particularly powerful. Being an appeal idea for Dance Straylight is nice, at the very least. Her support skills are Idol's Bond, Promise Recovery, Rest Boost, and Trouble Guard, and her unique support skill is Dance Mastery Dance, reaching plus 5 at level 65. Her TFD idea is Appeal, and her Insight token for Grad is Mental. Mei's 1-star passive is a dance 12% up that requires you to be in the dance position. This has a 30% chance to activate once. Her 2-star passive is a dance 20% up that requires the turn count to be 3 or earlier, and this has a 30% chance to activate once. Her 3-star uncap is a plus 50 to dance, and her 4-star appeal is a dance 2.3 that applies a 5% dance buff to all rivals and yourself for 5 turns. Her event passive is a dance 8% up that requires Mei on your team and has a 30% chance to activate twice. Mei earns a C. It's really more of the same with the recent event SRs, really. Strictly average with no real downside or upside other than it's not going to be particularly meta relevant. Mei will be helpful for Dance Straylight if you wanted an appeal idea for TFD, but aside from her handsome card design, there isn't a whole lot happening with this Mei. A for effort, at least. You might as well farm for Mei while she's around. And that will do it for the video today. Thank you so much, as always, for watching. Next time we'll be talking about whatever banner comes next, but we do know, however, that the next event card will be a Produce SR for Koito, so let's hope that she does well. I've been Cho, thanks for watching, have a wonderful rest of your day.